So I'm here to introduce the your host and star of the evening, and he describes himself as a wandering exile and has devoted his life to bearing witness to the events that shape our world. And in so doing, he's enabled all of us to see the world through his eyes. His book, War and Peace, captures 30 years of conflict and splendor. And here to tell us more, I'm delighted to introduce you to REZA.
Good evening. There are places in the world that has a very special meanings. And for me here, the Frontline Club, and being here is a very big honor and a very special place. The reason is that today when I walked in here with the Duncan, the director of the place, the first things he did, he brought me in front of a picture of 6 of our colleagues that were killed on the field, that were killed doing what I do and what many of you probably do and many of our friends does. Knowing that information and bringing information and spreading information, it is not only difficult, it is a dangerous work. And probably the one between you that are working on the field, you know how dangerous is it. I think that one of our colleagues was telling that for the war photography, be close, be fast, and be lucky. And I believe and I think that I was one of that was lucky till now. After 30 years being in the war fields and other conflicts, still I can come here and stand here and explain to you. So I'm very grateful for having me here tonight. I have prepared a 3-phase of the presentation. The first is a small version of a documentary films that was done by National Geographic television 7 years ago. They were doing a 12 series on 12 different people in the world. That the critter was the people that were the action, whatever is it, in which part of the work is it, their action is bring a change to the world. And one of those 12 people that they have chosen was my work as a photographer and as a humanitarian that you will see. So we will show in the beginning these films, and after I have chosen some of my works from the books that I would share with you, the stories. And the stories that to explain to you how brought me a photographer, continuing doing my photography works, becoming a humanitarian also, which I believe both of them are the same works. And I will show you and we will talk about it later. So I welcome you, and also I would like really to thank Aidan and all the team of the Getty. You came, many of you here, that has becoming a real supporter of the photojournalism, which is one of the many other endangered stories. And Getty, Aidan especially, they are doing a really great works on it. So thank you for being here, and I would like to start and share the films with you, which is called Shooting Back, and then we'll come to explain the pictures. Thank you.
Who is REZA?
He's a wise man.
He has experienced the heights and depths of life.
REZA is a world-class photographer who takes his camera into the trenches of today's hottest conflicts.
He is not afraid to do anything.
he risks his life all the time.
Pictures are worth 1,000 words, but in many ways REZA's pictures are worth 10,000 words. REZA is a man with a golden eye.
He's better than that. He has a golden heart and a golden eye.
He's a man on a mission.
It's so important to REZA to bring the world together, and I think he's going to try to do it single-handedly.
REZA's remarkable story begins here in Paris, his home base. Today, something very special is taking place, and REZA is making it happen. He's always making things happen. This time, he's trying to raise money for Afghanistan, so he's convinced the French Senate to host a fundraiser.
Unique things happen today. According to the French law, you cannot sell or buy these things inside the Senate. But idea was so exceptional that the president of the Senate himself, he said, I will find a legal way, I will sign a new law.
When REZA has an idea, people listen. As one of the world's elite photojournalists, his works have been featured in countless international newspapers and magazines, including Newsweek, Time, and Le Figaro. Since 1991, REZA has photographed 13 stories for the National Geographic magazine. Tonight, some of his most memorable shots from Afghanistan will go on the auction block. The highlight of the evening will be the sale of his camera, his much-loved Leica, used to take his most famous pictures.
Adjugé Madame Lambert, 5e rang dans la ligne. 1600 €.
What could compel one of the world's top photographers to sell his favorite camera? The answer unfolds thousands of miles away in Afghanistan. REZA was exiled from his homeland neighboring Iran as a young man. Afghanistan has become a second home for him, helping shape who he is and becoming a part of his soul.
I started 1979 as a professional photographer, and Russia invaded Afghanistan in 79 too. So this was also beginning of the two stories that was going between me and Afghanistan, and building up and building up and building up.
For more than 2 decades, he's tried to show what happens when innocent lives are caught in the conflict of war and give a voice to those who are suffering. Today, REZA is in the streets of Kabul. He meets 2 7-year-olds who are picking up trash to use for fuel. He wants to tell their story.
The happy people, they have no story. And I'm a storyteller. I'm doing war against the war, my pictures. The children and women are really the one that's suffering, the main victims. That's why I'm trying to just explain and show that injustice is actually, it's a global injustice.
After 22 years of war, Afghanistan is a country of countless widows and orphans. These girls lost their fathers. They're taking REZA home to meet their families.
You never go in a house in Afghanistan without bringing a gift for them. And I know what they need, which they haven't seen probably for years, is a 1 kilo of the meat. And I want to go to see the families where they're living and how they're living.
The mother is very sick, with severe headaches and chest pain. She's unable to take care of her 4 children.
He is the only son. The only income they have is from him selling water on the street. Her job is to bring what they need to cook. She's responsible for fire and he's responsible for water.
income is around 30 cents per day. So what he's getting, they can only buy only 3 bread per day for 4 people.
REZA is working to bridge the gap between affluence and poverty. His efforts are coordinated here in Paris. His office, called Webistan, is always open, and rooms are filled with family, friends, and colleagues who share REZA's vision of the world. He's created an environment that's very similar to his boyhood home in Tabriz, a small town in northwest Iran. His father, a government official, entertained many of the community's intellectuals, exposing REZA to a world of ideas at a very young age.
We had a very deep education in the literature and the history of Iran. We were taught the words of the very big famous Persian poets, thinkers, or important pillar of our education, of our culture, of our civilization.
REZA's education instilled early on a love for freedom of thought and speech.
I find out when I was 14 years old that my tool of expression would be the camera.
It was a passion he shared with his brother Manoucher, a passion that in the tightly censored time of the Shah of Iran would get REZA into trouble. When he was 16, he set out to expose the social injustices of the Shah's regime by secretly taking photographs and pasting them on public walls at night, only to have them torn down by the Shah's secret police the next morning. It was a dangerous game of cat and mouse. What followed would haunt REZA for the rest of his life. After 6 years, the Shah's secret police finally caught up with REZA. At age 22, he was arrested and thrown into prison.
Then the torture started, and it takes 5 months, day and night, 24 hours. Many times after night, they were coming in and putting eye bands and taking me and torturing me, all kind of the torture. Electric shocks and not letting you move for 24 hours and not letting you sleep for 3 days.
Amazingly, these 5 months of torture didn't break REZA's spirit. Instead, it helped shape the person he would later become. Throughout the ordeal, his family feared the worst as they waited for news of his whereabouts.
We didn't know for 3 months, we had no news. They wouldn't tell us where he is and what is he doing, or if he's alive, if he's not. And it took us a while before just going to see him for a few minutes. And it was really shocking to see him. He had lost a lot of weight. He could barely walk because of the torture of his feet.
Wow.
His sister, Parisher, made many of the family visits to the prison. It was a painful time, but his family understood the scope of REZA's commitment.
We are also proud of him because he was fighting for his beliefs.
Attention, regarde, concentre-toi. Voilà.
22 years later, REZA now has a family. 2 children, Dilazat and Janan. When he was released from prison, revolution was brewing in Iran. The Shah of Iran is exiled and dethroned. Soon after, the Ayatollah Khomeini assumes power. Amidst growing anti-American sentiment, a crowd of 500 Iranians stormed the gates of the U.S. Embassy, eventually taking 52 American diplomats hostage. REZA is there to capture the only photos. It's his big break, By morning, his work is on the front pages of newspapers all over the world. For the ensuing 444 days of the hostage crisis, REZA is Newsweek's correspondent outside the embassy. The magazine dubs him the 53rd hostage. But REZA soon realizes a free press is no more welcome under the revolutionary regime than it was under the Shah. He hears that the Kurds are being persecuted by the new government, so he travels undercover to get their story. To his horror, the Republic is killing its own people, not a news item they would want leaked. For 17 days, REZA travels covertly to get the story, cutting off all contact with the outside world. When he finally calls his press agency, his obituary has already been written.
Is you REZA? I said, what's going on? I said, you are dead. I said, what do you mean I'm dead? He said, everybody's giving you dead here.
REZA's photos break the story of atrocities against the Kurds. Blacklisted again, it won't be long before the regime's secret squad begins looking for him. But REZA is relentless in his determination. His years in prison actually strengthened his resolve to expose injustice. He sets his sights on the Iran-Iraq war and risks his life to cover it. With forged identity papers, REZA makes his way to the front line, where an incoming mortar round determines his fate.
And I got 3 shrapnels in my hand here. And I fell down, dust going on and people crying and blood's going all over. And I remember my first reaction was grab my camera and put my hand on the first taking pictures of my hand.
As a war casualty, he slips through the cracks to a hospital in France. Walking to the plane, REZA snaps a shot with his camera. It's the last photo he ever takes in Iran. Throughout the past 20 years, REZA has covered most of the world's hotspots and photographed some of its most controversial figures. But above all, one man captured his admiration. A little-known Afghan resistance leader who was fighting the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. In April 1985, REZA went looking for a man the whole Soviet army couldn't find. It was a treacherous trek through a no-man's land of blockades and skirmishes. Finally, after a 3-month journey, REZA found him, the rebel leader, Ahmed Shah Massoud. He was different from other leaders REZA had grown to mistrust. A reluctant warrior, his dream is to be a school teacher in a free Afghanistan. The 2 men form an immediate bond.
They were very close, I think, and close personalities. I think he considered Massoud as a kind of brother.
And little by little in conversation with him, I found that he has more interest to the culture than everything else. He was a real, deeply intellectual for me, philosopher, a thinker, a poet.
REZA and Massoud used to read about Rumi, and Rumi always talks about this human soul being in chains unless he breaks the shackles and really becomes emancipated. Unless one has suffered, you cannot truly relate to these individuals who are also suffering. And I think REZA, having gone through that period of suffering in prison in Iran, that he's able to relate to people's stories.
When the two part ways, Reza and Masood make a pact. Someday, they will enter Kabul together after the Soviets are beaten. 7 years later, Masood personally lifts Reza onto his tank as he captures the capital. The Soviets leave the country in ruin. The United Nations faces the momentous task of rebuilding Afghanistan. Knowing Reza's reputation and how the Afghans trust him, the UN asks for his help in rebuilding the country. Reza puts his photographic career on hold for 9 months to lead 10,000 Afghan workers. They distribute food and help rebuild schools, clinics, and roads. Reza is so fulfilled trying to help this country get back on its feet, he considers giving up his photographic career forever. But then he gets a call from Washington, D.C. The National Geographic magazine wants Reza to do a story, a plum assignment for any photographer. Reza now faces a tough choice, a career in photography or continue his humanitarian work. A legless beggar boy will help seal his decision. Reza decides to accept the assignment for National Geographic magazine on location in Cairo, Egypt. His first article that features a legless beggar boy being whipped by his handler grabs the hearts of countless readers. In a split-second decision, Reza intentionally leaves the handler's head out of frame. Picture editor Ellie Rogers admires Reza's composition.
You have to look at the shadow. You miss the point of the whole picture if you don't look at the shadow. So it makes the reader participate in making the picture work. That is what separates a humdrum picture from something special.
Like many of Reza's pictures, this one called people to action.
Many people wrote in and said, what can we do for this child? We want to contribute some money to help this child.
The experience confirmed for Reza that he could touch more people with his photography by bringing awareness to parts of the world that are often ignored.
Children coming out of the village, and I saw them in a small village.
REZA sees the whole world with a great freshness and enthusiasm.
And he speaks the language of children. I mean, he's just a universal person.
When Reza and Rachel met 13 years ago, it was the melding of two mediums. Their first collaboration was a campaign created for kids. Rachel, a gifted writer, provides the words for Reza's photos. The messages are simple and direct. I want to learn. I'm not born for war. Let me play. With a strong interest in children's issues, Reza and Rachel were horrified when widespread violence erupted in Rwanda in 1994. They dropped everything and headed for Africa. The ensuing civil war resulted in a genocide of about 800,000 people, more than a third of them children. Amidst the chaos, as families fled to makeshift refugee camps, thousands of children were separated from their parents. To help reunite them, Reza teamed up with UNICEF to teach the locals how to use a camera to shoot portraits of 12,000 kids. Philippe Duhamel, a UNICEF official, was with Reza at the camps.
A very remarkable aspect of Reza's personality was how he quickly interacted with the refugees and how many hours he spent sitting in the camp and talking to these people, trying to better understand their situation and why they were there and what were their living conditions.
Once the children's photos were taken, bulletin boards were set up throughout the camps in hopes that parents would recognize their children and learn their whereabouts. Out of a total 12,000 children photographed, 3,500, more than a quarter of them, are reunited with their families.
It was one of the most, I think, important, or again, immediate answer that I got from the photography.
REZA's choice is to be on the front line, making war against war with his camera. He came to terms with his own mortality years ago in his prison cell in Iran.
What is the price of my life? Why do you have all those millions of the people who were killed?
In the fall of 2000, REZA again puts his life on the line to see his old friend Masood. It's been 8 years since they last met.
A bit emotional. I will meet him in a few minutes. It's a great moment, very great moment.
This time, the Afghan leader is fighting the Taliban. When REZA learns about the atrocities being committed by the Taliban regime, he counsels Masood, come to Paris, tell the story. Masood does just that. In April of 2001, he holds a press conference at the French Senate. The message is ominous. The West is ignoring Afghanistan at its own peril. But Masood's words fall on deaf ears. Afghanistan at this point is not a world priority. REZA vows to change that. 4 months after Masood's departure, and just weeks before terrorists attack the World Trade Center, REZA comes up with a plan to bring media attention to Afghanistan. Under Taliban rule, freedom of press has been non-existent. Tonight, REZA launches Aina, a media center that will give local journalists the tools and training to cover the news.
We have established in the Western countries a lot of organization to help the people in need. But there is not such an organization to help the local journalists, to help them to show us their image of the refugee people, of the ongoing war and forgotten refugee people.
The media center's first contribution is a video camera for 2 Afghan journalists, Fahim Dasti and Yusuf Nisar. Their wish comes true, but at a tragic price. On September 9th, Fahim is injured when 2 suicide bombers take the life of Masood. 2 days later, on September 11th, the Twin Towers fall, and Afghanistan becomes the focus of world attention. After years of battle, the warrior is laid to rest. Sadly, the peace he fought for comes with his death. In just 3 months, his soldiers liberate the capital with the help of the West. Kabul, Afghanistan. Taliban rule is over. Martial law is in effect. REZA is en route to the only printing house in the city. With his help, Afghan journalists are once again hard at work on the city paper, a weekly that had been banned for 6 long years. It's what Masood dreamed of, but would never see. Tonight, the Kabul Weekly rolls off this vintage Soviet-era press. Freedom is in the air.
شام
is one thing in the life of everybody, all the human, that has more value than any other things. And this is freedom. These people were living under occupation of the Soviet army, then Pakistani army, then Taliban. And for 22 years, they didn't have this feeling of what is freedom. And now, from 13 November till today, it's the face of the people has changed.
But freedom may be short-lived in a place that has known chaos for a generation. Now, for the second time in 22 years, Afghans have a brief window for democracy.
This was a situation in 1990 where the Soviets were defeated. I mean, I have an impression that I'm living the same story, one story twice.
Just months ago, the stadium was used for public executions. Now everything has changed.
Their music, their dancing, all things that was forbidden. It's like you're coming from the darkest age suddenly to the brightest moment in your life.
REZA is determined peace will not be short-lived. All his energies are directed toward construction of a media center. This former Taliban building, used for interrogating prisoners, will become a home for free press in Kabul.
I'm hoping to bring a lot of teachers from all kinds of universities in the world, that they come here, stay months or 2 months, and teach them different materials. Photography, video, film, high technology, the computer.
The plans are far-reaching and extend into the community. For REZA, no plan can exist without considering the lives of children. There are an estimated 60,000 street children in Kabul. REZA's ultimate goal is to give hundreds of them an alternative to begging.
It's here. The hidden object for me is that they can start reading and understanding.
Today, REZA is preparing them for their first real job as paper boys.
This will give them an opportunity to start getting money and knowing little by little to understand what are the rules of the businesses in the world. هفته‌نامه کابل، هفته‌نامه کابل، اخبار روز. What I do, actually, it's because I love to contact people. I love to talk to them. I love to understand their stories. These are all these people which I photograph that gave me their soul, and they gave me their way of the thinking, and they teach me also how I should be with the other people, how I should answer, how I should be humble.
Back in Paris, the final gavel falls. The Senate auction is a complete success. Through the sale of REZA's photographs, $50,000 has been raised for Afghanistan. But the goal is so much more than just a financial one. REZA is a storyteller. Tonight, an audience learned the tragic tale of a country and its people. If one night could illustrate a life, this could well be it.
This is the age that everything in our life has made. This is when I'm 13, 14 years old in Tabriz. And if you think about you and your life, you will remember that who you are now, it was made in this times and these ages. That's why more and more, all my works, everything I'm doing, it's concentrated toward the people in these ages. In Afghanistan, in Uganda, in Sri Lanka, in many other countries. That's how the whole organization is working. That's why in this age, when I take the first camera, and immediately I had this envy of doing a magazine. My father has gone to the city of Bandar Abbas, which is in the south of Iran in the near Persian Gulf, and I was following him, and I find out that there is no newspapers, no magazine in the whole city. And I decided at the age of 50 to make the first magazine for the school, for the high school. And I called it Parvaz, which is meaning to fly or to soar. But 2 days after the magazine just was printed, I was arrested. This was the first shock ever in my life. At this age, you want to do a magazine for your high school and you're arrested by the secret police saying because you are living in a country that the freedom of press, it doesn't exist. And that was how I continued. I continued this time in a different way, as you saw in the films. Photographing, using photography as one of the important vectors of the information in the world. It's one of the most incredible universal language that we have never had. And we're just in the beginning of this international universal language, how to use it. 40 years ago in Iran, I started using photography, going to the villages, going to the around the cities, the suburbs where people living in a very bad condition, taking pictures and putting them night times on the walls. This was how everything started. This was how I was arrested again. This was how I was put for 5 months on the torture and 3 years in prison, just taking pictures. That's why I think that this place is important. This is the whole works of the journalist, the reality of the information. That's how everything is began here. In the meantime, in all my works, everything I was doing, it was meeting people that from the small child in Afghanistan, from the oldest man in Sri Lanka, all of them, they became my masters. They are the people that gave me the understanding the world and being with them. And sometimes they give me their pictures. I never say that I take these pictures. They give it to me. This is the whole difference. This was the whole difference of when people give their pictures to you, you see the difference. This is the pictures that when people look to it, their heart starts shaking because the subject gave the pictures, not the photographer take the pictures. And all these people, different people I met, they were all became all part of my thoughts, my actions. One of them, it was this little boy. You will see the whole of his story and what he did to me and the message that he gave to me in the last part of the presentation in the video of Aina. Then it was this little girl in Tora Bora. Tora Bora is now being one of the places in the world that was bombed massively. This is the place which bin Laden was living, and she was one of these little kids in this village. Whole her life, from the time that she was burned till now, she was under bombardment. Look at her eyes and you will find how. This is what I say, that the real victims of the wars are children, are women, not the soldiers on the trenches, not the generals sitting in their army camps. Those generals, they will never send their children to the war zones. They send children of the others. That's the whole thing. And obviously, being a Persian, being Iranian, as you know, each civilization has a pillar of the culture, and our culture's pillar are the poetries. That's how we grow up. That's how we read. That's how Rumi, Hafiz, and Saadi influence us. Listen to it. I said, what about my eyes? Keep them on the road. I said, what about my passion? Keep it burning. I said, what about my heart? Tell me what you hold inside it. I said, pain and sorrow. He said, stay with it. This is Rumi. This is also Rumi, who is the founders of the mysticism and Sufism and the winning dervishes. The picture was published in the cover of National Geographic. This was a story I was doing on the Turkey. And I find a guy, he was one of the genius masters of the computer of the Turkey. And this was he was doing, as many of you go to the gym after workout, and this is his way of the working out, spirituality. And look at this, another message, that how you can be really taught. Either exist as you are, or be as you look. These are the words of the wisdoms. Here comes one of my early photographs. Actually, the first anniversary of Iranian Revolution. This is the only one I brought to show to you from Iran. But look at this. The hand is almost the hand of a narrator saying, look at the scene, look at what's happened. This is what's happened in Iran after the revolution. You don't even find the two people in the same direction. Everybody's fighting his neighbors, everybody trying to make a room for himself. This was what was going on, what is going on after 30 years. We are in the 30 years now. Well, probably it's by coincidence, but if you remember in the films that I had to quit Iran because my hand was wounded, and now we're coming with the pictures on the hands again. This is Beirut. After I had to flee Iran and come to Paris and get my hand was fixed out, I went to Beirut immediately, and I started working there with the Palestinians. And this time was the Beirut 1982. You do remember, some of you, this huge siege of the Beirut of 18,000 bombs per day on a civilian city. 18,000 bombs a day. It made 15,000 men and women dead. I don't know how many were wounded. And the last one were the massacres in Sabra and Shatila, if you remember. I was wounded in Beirut by phosphor bombs. And I brought to Paris a few months in hospital. My lungs was totally kaput and burned out. And the doctors was trying to fix that. And after 6 months, the doctor told me, now it's okay, but you need to go to the high mountains and stay there a couple of months. And I said, what high mountains? Why? He said, you go to Alp or Pyrenees? And I looked at him and I said, what about Afghanistan? He thought I'm joking. He said, you can't walk. I said, well, I would prefer to go in the mountains in Afghanistan than the Alp. And that's how I ended, starting in 1983. my first trip for Time magazine, Afghanistan. And this was another of people who I met, and their way of life and their way of thought influenced me a lot. I learned a lot of it. Well, in the 80s, Afghanistan was the battlefield of the two incredible part of the world. You had a biggest army in the world, almost, Russian army. And then you had this small country, Afghanistan, people living like 2,000 years ago. And they were fighting each other. Can you imagine? These two groups, and you are in the middle. You are looking, seeing what's going on. The biggest army with most sophisticated weapons, and in front of them, just few people from the villages. And this is the entrance of a valley which is called Panjshir Valley. The people that who have been in Afghanistan or here learn, they know what is the Panjshir Valley is it. This is exact place where Russians were defeated. This is the exact historical place when Masood fighting from this valley, the Russians, and the Russian has decided finally to finish, and they brought thousands of the troops. You know, it's still, I don't understand. Some people think that if they send more troops to Afghanistan, they will win the war. It's wrong. You can't win the war in Afghanistan. Nobody has done it. From Alexander the Great to the Persian biggest army empire, to the Indian Empire, to the Mongols, to the British Army, to the Soviet Army, to the Taliban, to Al-Qaeda, nobody was able to take over of Afghanistan. And this is the historical and importance. But the one important thing that is not written in the history is that all of them that they lost the war in Afghanistan, they lost their empires. In 19th century, the British, they sent 18,000 soldiers to Afghanistan from India. And the Viceroy told them, I want you to go and flood this land of the rebels. I don't want anybody alive over there. This was the last message of the Viceroy to the 18,000 soldiers was sent to Afghanistan. 6 months after, the Viceroy was right, but in a different way. He said that I don't want to be one guy left alive, other side. But 6 months after, from 18,000 soldiers, there were only one returned back to India, one. And they let him go to explain what's happened to them. This is the land, this is the place, this is the people. So when all the Russian army came inside the valley, Masood people has taken totally back. They let them in. And there was just few dynamites over the rocks that exploded and blocked the back of the Soviet army. They were trapped in the middle. That was how everything's finished. That was how the Berlin walls came down. The Berlin walls came down by Afghans. They defeated the Russian Soviet army. They send a message to everybody in the former Soviet Union country that, look, your army, it's nothing. Those Afghans, they defeated them. This was the whole thing. This was the way it happened. So, going there at those years, you had to walk on the mountains for miles and miles and miles, hidden from in the winter, in the summer, 5,000 kilometers. This is what I did. This is what I walked in 10 years in Afghanistan to bring those pictures. One day I met those kids. It was one of those times that you are so tired that you haven't eaten for weeks, that you have lost 20 kilos, and you're just crying. You're so tired. and you enter a village just thinking that where is the place which I can fall down, and you have these kids running after you and saying, hey, photograph, take my pictures, take my pictures. That's what I did, and that's what they give one of my best pictures to me, because even if I was tired and I was crying, I didn't want to tell them, get out of my way, I'm tired. They asked me to take their pictures, and I turned back. I said, of course I will. This was how it happened. And this was how finally I met Masood, whom you know, what role he had, and how important he was and he is for the whole history. Another person that I met, and I did a lot of works with her, was Benazir Bhutto. This was the beginning of when she came. She started coming from London back to Pakistan in '86, and I spent 3 months with her, traveling and doing all her campaign before that she has become Prime Minister. Well, everybody has pictures of burqa in a different way. And between all I have taken, I love this one more because for me it's give this freedom. It looks like this woman is throwing out and she's just running away. She's in front of her, she's open, and it looks like that she's just throwing out. This is the way which I believe that everything related to the culture and religion should be really worked out. I do remember during the Masood when some of the delegation from European Parliament women came, and this woman was urging Masood to ban burqa. And he said, if I ban the burqa, what is my difference between the Taliban with Taliban? They want every woman has burqa, and if I said I'm banning, I will be like them. What I will do, I will say every woman is free to have or not have burqa. Then let them to choose, because if they do it, they do have some cultural reason. Some of them they do. So this is the way I think that sometimes different culture trying to interfere in the other culture without knowing the result of what will be happening. Another important moment, which in my career was at this moment. You remember in the film that I became a United Nations Director of Operation for 1 year in Afghanistan, and this was in the north province of Badakhshan. There was an earthquake at night, and I wake up, and I didn't know really what was it. So I take the car, and I went to the villages to see if anything was wrong, if they really need help. And I was touring the villages on the mountains, night times, stay in a village for a few hours, and wake up. It was everything was totally covered by the snow. I started turning back, and I lost my way. I had a few liters of the gas and staying in the car, and I was hearing all the wolves just start moving around and coming to me. And suddenly, from the very back, I saw these little spots coming to me. And they came, and and this was it. I had one pictures. And the man, and one of the things I recognized was this blanket, this green blanket, because these are the blanket which I was distributing in the UN compound for the needy people. And they had got 3 days back. And he remembered me. So first he saw me, he come to me, he hugged me, he said, you are the director, whatever, and you saved our lives. You gave our food, you gave my family a blanket and everything. And I said, no, you saved my life. You know, look at this, all these wolves all around. If I haven't seen you, I will not be what's going on. So he showed me the road back. This was how the sometimes strange things happen. Obviously, one of the main problems in our times, in my times, was apartheid in South Africa, 85. It was very beginning of the riots. Everybody was talking, there is going to be riots. There is going to be riots. But no visa for the journalist. I tried, I was working for Time magazine, French Liberation and other publication, no visa for a journalist. So I said, Reza, go for it. I went to the South African embassy in Paris. I was dressed like a very old colonial colonel with my pipe and everything and the hat. And I said, so I'm an elephant hunter and I want to go to the South Africa. And he said, fantastic, what a good idea. I said, yeah, because, and I heard that you are the only country that you have banned shooting elephant. I said, yes, we do. Yeah, we love elephants. I said, me too. Can I get a visa to go to see this elephant and photograph them? Of course. How many months you want? I was going to say 1, and I did 3. And he gave me 3 months visa. And this 3 months was, I covered the whole things in the South Africa. Haven't seen a single elephant all over there. This picture, this was a time that Nelson Mandela was in prison and nobody knew how his face was. But when he came out of prison and I looked at him, I said, God, this is Mandela's childhood. It's very similar. It looks like the same face. Then came the story of this Said that you remember in National Geographic. This was the beginning of my works with National Geographic. After working from 91 for National Geographic, I continuously stay freelance because I wanted to cover also other events that happened that National Geographic doesn't want to cover, like Sarajevo. I went to Sarajevo many times during the siege. And you do remember the pictures coming out of Sarajevo. Maybe you haven't seen this because it doesn't say a lot when you look on it. But for me, when people asking what is the one of the most incredible pictures of the war, I showed this one. You know why? Because this was a few days before Christmas in Sarajevo. And the snipers were shooting everywhere. Nobody was able to come out for days. And sometimes there was 2-3 hours for some reason, no snipers. Everybody knew that this is the time to go for a hospital, to go for food, to go for water, running people around. And I was walking and I saw this little girl standing over there. Look into her eyes, I thought, this is something strange, strong. I photographed her first. Then I asked her, through my interpreter, what are you doing here? She said, I'm selling my dolls. I said, why? She said, the grandma hasn't eaten for 3 days. I may get some money for her. This is the war. This is, the war is not only the wounded people and the dead people. The reality of the war, this is what it does to these people, to these children. She may not have been killed, she may not have been wounded, but the wound in her mind will stay forever in her mind. This is the reality of the war. This is what I'm fighting for. That's what I'm fighting against wars. I have been out of Iran at this moment for 12 years. I haven't been in Iran. And I got this assignment on the Turkey for National Geographic. And obviously Turkey has a huge border with Iran. And in all assignment, my idea was, Reza, prepare you and you go near the border, you will see Iran. You know, 12 years after. And I arrived to the city I rent a taxi. I told the guy, I speak Turkish language, so I told him that, listen, I want you work. I will be here for 3 days, and I do the car for 3 days. We made a deal, and I said I'm going to take pictures. I will ask you to stay, and sometimes I'm staying in places for an hour. He said no problem. I get used to all this. Don't worry, don't worry. And we came, and the car in the first turn, and suddenly I saw these 2 kids bringing the empty TV. Obviously, I had no time to really be gentle with the taxi driver. I've really hit his shoulder and I said, stop. And the guy told me I must have been having a heart attack, and brake, and I went down, take pictures, come back. He still looks to me, said, sir, this is the way you are going to work all day? I said, it depends on the pictures. If you are intelligent enough and you saw something and then you stop yourself, otherwise I will do it. But anyway, this is it's funny, many people see this and their first reaction is, oh, what a nice settings. Did you ask them to carry this TV? And the reality of my photographs, and probably that's why make the whole difference, is that none of my photographs is staged. None of my pictures is asking people, you move here, you go over there, you jump over there, you go here. It's the reality is much more strong than Spielberg or anybody's mind. You can't really, I haven't seen anybody was able to create a setting that is more stronger than reality. All we need, we photographer, is to learn how to use the tool, to use in a way that we can't miss it. It's the guys crossing, running. Well, I mean, how many seconds before you need that your camera will be ready, you have the right lenses, the right exposure, and right everything to go for it. This is the way which I had tried, and I use all my photographs. Another encounter that you know that after the fall of Soviet Union, there was few million old men and women that they were left alone. They were the one that really left alone. They were the one that was thrown out of their jobs and their works. And still, if you go there after 20 years, you will find them still. They have become older and poor. Streets are full of them, men and women. They have no place to go. Sergei, when I met him in Khabarovsk, the city of Khabarovsk is in the far eastern Siberia. I saw a little tattoo and I went to him. I talked to him. I say hello to him. He looks to me. And then I asked, and I said, my name is REZA, I'm a photographer. What's your name? And he looks to me, I said, Sergei Vasilovich. Then he started crying in a very, very hard way. Crying. And I was shocked. I was asking my interpreter, what did anything wrong to him? Then we stopped. He stopped, and I said, why you cry? He said, because it's 10 years that nobody has asked my name. 10 years, nobody has asked my name. This is how those people living. This is how the many of the things happening. And so these are the teams or people that in the past 30 years, for me, was important to understand it. And obviously, one of those important things in our words is the famine. How you can believe that in 20th century, end of the 20th century, still we have people dying from famine, while we have the surplus and over of the millions of the foods all over the world, that we are burning the foods. How come? What is, and these pictures, the reason that I didn't want to show the other pictures, that you have seen, that all these people laying down and, I want to show the dignity of this man. Look at his way of his thoughts, his face. It's the real dignity of the humanity. There is a lot of question that he's asking us. Why? This is the only one picture that I had. Obviously, the story of the Rwanda Burundi, which you saw, I did a lot of works on it. These are the important moments of the human history, our history. And I believe that each of us, we have the same responsibility to follow those stories, to be part of it, to help them. We are the responsible civilians. Finding 3,500 people that they were lost and uniting them through the photographs. It's amazing works. This is the reason I'm saying that photography, still we think that it's books, magazines, or we do, but has a tremendous different way of using photography today. And I have done tens of the projects like this. I just came from Italy, in Sicilia, starting a photo project in the Italian toughest suburb, where the police doesn't go in. There is a suburb in Sicilia that the police doesn't go in, and I'm going to start a photo project with them to change the whole concept of the suburb. So you can do a lot of works with photography. That's why the importance of this tool is, and I'm emphasizing on it. I worked a lot about small arms, that's what they call it, the way that they call it. Small arms are the children's that are taken to the army. And the Chong was one of those million children that I met in Cambodia. Just by looking at his face, looking his gun is bigger than him. His cloth is bigger than him. And there are thousands of those children taken to the army, fighting, doing the dirty job, being abused sexually, everything that you can imagine. There was a big fight between Armenian and Azerbaijani in post-Soviet Union. Here, this was the people, the refugee people, working on a salt mine. 10 hours a day, 40 degrees centigrade in the summer, minus 40 in the winter, and this is what these people doing. And when I take pictures, he looks back to me and he said, I wish I had my pictures 4 years ago to show you. I looked at him and said, what is your pictures 4 years ago? He said, well, in my hometown, in my village, before the wars came in, before the Armenian takeover, I was a school director. And I have 5 children. We fled, we came here, and this is what I do now. I have to walk, he said, 20 kilometers every day to come here because I cannot offer even the transport. By the money I'm gaining, it's just enough for my children. Then he looks to me and said, but it is not a problem, I can do it. My main problem is that I was a teacher and my children is not going to the school now. This is how it was really harming his heart. More I works, the more I see how the children are treated in the world, more I became advocate that we really need to rethink our education system everywhere, every places. We really need to find a different way of the education to the children all over the world. Is it a way to dress your children? Military way? Is it the right way to do? Even if it's for fun? Look what's happening then. in Pakistan and the tribal agencies, the place which is now the eye of the storm of the whole world, where in the Afghan-Pakistan border, when everything's happening in the Waziristan. This is the workshops. The children comes off school and they go there for a couple of hours, or they don't go to school and they stay there and works for hours to make the guns. Another having fun playing with tanks, and even they were giving each one 10 pallets of snow, so they were putting inside and pushing, fighting each other with the snows. This was in China on that. But this is the reality of our future, is that if we are to teach real peace in the world, and if we are to carry on a real war against war, we shall have to begin with the children. That was the whole concept. This was when, after all those years in the war zones and the conflict zone, I realized that the destruction is two different destruction. There is one destruction that is a building and visual and material destruction in the wars, in the conflict zones. But the real destruction is destruction of the soul in this war, the traumatism of the war. And when I look back and I saw that, my God, our humanitarian works, UN, NGOs, 99%, it's only to build the buildings. Nobody care of the other part, other destruction, which is so important. This was how the whole concept of the creating a new type of organization, which is not a question of the bed and the bread, but give the local people the possibility of talking to each other, of having the educational tool, of having radios, of having everything that's necessary to communicate to each other. This is what I call the third generation of humanitarian organization. That's how, after I'm making mathematics, because I told you that I started my first magazine for the children when I was 16 years old, and it was called Parwaz, which is to fly. In 2002, I started this magazine in reality for the children in Afghanistan again, almost after 40 years. And this magazine, which is called the same name, Parwaz or to Fly, which was going on part of the whole works that we were doing, which I would like to share with you a little video that explains the whole concept of how a journalist, how a photographer, after seeing all this has seen, want to react, want to create something else. This is my latest pictures in Afghanistan. This is the hope for me for the future. This is what I believe, that we can help the world. We have the capacity and possibility of making sunshine in the cemeteries of the wars. So let me show the films, and then I will be with you again.
It was 20 years ago. I was on my way to meet a population caught up in a war imposed by the biggest and most powerful army in the world, the Russian army. As months passed, hiding in the mountains, villages, and trenches with those men, women, and children, I discovered a magnificent country. I also discovered the people with a magnificent soul. Their eyes spoke volumes. They spoke of inner depths, beauty and suffering caused by years of war, exile, and famine. I met people who had lived through not only the worst period in their own history, but the worst period in the history of mankind. During those years in Afghanistan and elsewhere, it was 20 years ago. I was on my way to meet a population caught up in a war imposed by the biggest and most powerful army in the world, the Russian army. As the months passed, hiding in the mountains, villages, and trenches with those men, women, and children, I discovered a magnificent country. I also discovered the people with a magnificent soul. Their eyes spoke volumes. They spoke of inner depths, beauty and suffering caused by years of war, exile, and famine. I met a people who had lived through not only the worst period in their own history, but the worst period in the history of mankind. During those years in Afghanistan and elsewhere, I discovered as a young photojournalist war and the world and its most cruel. Not only in Afghanistan, but also in Soweto in South Africa, in the refugee camps of Pakistan, followed later by those of Rwanda, Burundi, Lebanon war, the tragedy of Palestine, Karabakh, the Philippines, the Sarajevo. It's impossible to remain a spectator. I began to think more deeply about wars, repression, exiles, and the countless dead they produce. I discovered people with solutions too. The Red Cross workers are pioneers of humanity. The French doctors, as they were rightly called in the 70s, have taken on the physical reconstruction of those most in need. But when the guns fall silent and the armies withdraw, what is most urgently needed is tangible reconstruction. An army of Spetsmen sets off to remove all trace of ruin. Non-profit organizations build roads, houses, schools, clinics, and other infrastructure. Others devote themselves to healing bodily suffering, offering artificial limbs, operations, vaccination, bandage, and crutches to overcome the handicaps and suffering caused by war. But there is also an invisible form of destruction, most difficult to heal, that of damaged dignity, that of wounded soul, that of wounded culture. These gaping wounds to the soul, buried in the deepest heart of one's being, can in the long term undermine efforts to physically rebuild a country and prevent an entire nation from getting back on its feet. The culture of war breeds more war. People who aren't given intellectual and cultural weapons have just one reference: the deafening noise of guns. That's why Aina came into being. Aina means mirror in Farsi. It is a mirror held out to people who are searching for an identity they lost through years of war, so they can rediscover their own lost heritage. Aina helps create independent media organization and expression of culture in all its diverse forms, in places where freedom of expression is still a fragile concept. Aina calls itself a third-generation humanitarian organization whose activities seek to heal wounded souls by providing logistical support and training for local working in the media and culture. Today in Afghanistan, Aina is supporting the creation of civil society and democratization after more than 2 decades of war. Aina has media and culture centers in Kabul and 7 other cities: Herat, Mazar Sharif, Kunduz, Jalalabad, Khost, Ghazni, and Kandahar. Hopefully, other towns will soon have their own independent media and cultural centers. In these 8 centers, hundreds of Afghans are working in the media and cultures in a variety of fields. To date, Aina has supported 8 publications: the women's magazines, Malalai and Sirat, weekly newspaper, Kabul Weekly, children's magazine, Parwaz, society magazine, Sabaun, the satirical review, Zambil Gham, and Afghanistan's first French magazine, Le Nouvel de Kabul, and soon the first English magazine. And Aina News, a sort of weekly international press review, so Afghans can read what the world thinks and writes about them and their country. In video, Aina has sought to train Afghan women to tell the story of their country over the last 20 years, based on accounts by other Afghan women who make up 50% of the population. This is their story. It is the camera women trained by Aina who film and interview these women and tell their stories. In this way, we discover another Afghanistan seen through women's eyes from a point of view of the world that has been hidden away from many, many years. Then there are photojournalists, around 15 young men and women who are among the first Afghan photojournalists and also the first female Afghan photojournalists. Aina has set up a radio department run by Afghan women called Afghan Women Voices, and a mobile cinema unit designed to travel from village to village, both to educate people who cannot read newspapers or magazines. These educational films are a genuine form of informal visual education for villagers who live in the remotest parts of the country. Aina is open to all forms of cultural activities, from exhibitions of photographs, painting, theater, concerts, everything that can provide the Afghan people with a breeze of cultural life. In its production and training activities, Aina uses up-to-date technology, aware of the gap between media professionals in the West and those in Afghanistan in terms of modern logistical support. Aina has sought to provide these tools of freedom to Afghanistan. I mean tools of freedom, everything that we have acquired in the West that Afghans have yet to obtain. Aina supports a group of people whose activities in the culture and the journalistic life of their country are part of Afghans' education in peace and freedom. I remember one day in 1990 when I was working for the United Nations in the North province of Badakhshan. I was handing out wheat to people who were building roads, irrigation canals, and clinics. One day, when I was walking on a village, I heard children laughing. I turned around and saw a young boy coming out of school with a little plant in his hand. He had learned at school to look after it. He had watered the clod of earth carefully, and out of it a shoot had grown. So the teacher had let him take it home. He was so proud that his eyes shone. When I took this photo, I asked him, "What are you going to do with your plant?" His answer is perhaps one of the reasons why I founded Aina, and perhaps one of the reasons why I still return to this country time and again, and also maybe one of the reasons that still I'm doing what I do. He said, "I'm going to grow a tree out of this plant." Today, Aina is like that plant. Its roots are in the rich cultural soil of Afghanistan and the world. I hope it will become a tree of culture and peace, today in Afghanistan and tomorrow in every country where freedom of expression is still fragile.
So, Reza, thank you. An amazing journey. Thank you for that. And we're going to have a Q&A now for a little while. So if you have some questions, if you raise your hand, we've got some mics and we'll move them around the room. But I'd like to start off with one, Reza. Do you think after that journey, your 30 years, do you think your photography or photography in general really has an effect on people? Do you think it really can cause change? Or do the public become kind of blasé about what they see?
Well, I really believe that the photography has an important role to play. The real challenge is us, the photographer, that we have always inventing a new way, inventing of new emotion, inventing a new way, so the people that can be blasé of what always they have seen. So it's to us to create a different way of explaining to them of different stories. But for sure, photography is one of the major change makers of the century.
And do you think now that we're moving into a new world where, you know, the kind of traditional approach of photography in a magazine is changing to a far more rapid and accessible media, where we're having multimedia and blogging and all these different aspects where people are coming in, and a whole generation are growing up not really reading magazines or newspapers, but getting their information from other sources. Do you see that as a plus?
In reality, yes. I do think that if you look back to the whole human history of how the evolution of these tools was, just remember that 4,500 years ago, our pages were the clay. And when invented the writings, we had people which sitting and curving on the clay one page. It was going on for 1,000 years when someone came up and said, "Hey, I had a new invention. It's called papyrus." And obviously it's created amazing people saying that, "Oh, paper, papyrus? I love to take this clay in my hand and feel it and read it. I don't want a papyrus that it's everything written this." This was 4,000 years ago. That's why I think that these are only tools. We didn't have a, let's say, better writer after the computer were invented or pen, whatever. It is, for me, more you can show pictures, more you have possibilities of the blogging, of internet, it's better. That's how we are going to make connection.
But we still need the storytellers.
We need the storytellers, exactly.
So, do we have any questions out in the audience? There's a gentleman there.
Reza, it's so great to see you after all these years and in one piece. I just wondered if you have any plans for women's situation in Afghanistan, you know, based on what you explained, the culture, the situation of women is not that fantastic. Do you have any plan to tell the stories of women's lives over there?
Well, the best way that I have found, actually, is to give Afghan women the voice, so themselves talks. The radio that we helped to create, which is called Afghan Women Voices, it's the only radio for the women's, and there's not too many in other part of the world, actually. A radio which is, we trained Afghan women to become journalists. We helped them to get the computer. We helped train them to use a computer. We helped them to get the what you call it, when you send the radio transmission. It's a transmission material. So 9 hours a day, 20 Afghan journalists talking to 5 million Afghan women. I think that this is a fantastic way of bringing the change. The change will come up in 30 years, in 50 years, in 10 years, I don't know. But that's how you have to act. That's how we are acting, not only in Afghanistan, in many other countries. We are going to start this concept of the women radio in Africa, in refugee camps, in different places. So I do remember 2 days after the fall of Taliban, the TV was showing Kabul street, and obviously all the women were having burqa, and there were 2 only women with no burqa. And people in Paris was calling me and sending emails saying, "My God, why is still this woman wearing burqa? Is the Taliban is over?" I said, you know, it is not you, it is there. It is they will decide when it's the time to take off. This is their stories. It is not our stories. We can't push them saying that you do this or you don't do this. We just help them to create their own worlds. Creating a magazine for the woman, creating a magazine for the children. I do believe that these are the way that it will bring more changes to the world.
Another question over here.
Hi, thank you, that was amazing. I just wanted to know, was there ever a point when you felt you'd seen too much as one person, as one human, and you couldn't go on?
Do I have seen too much?
Was there ever a point during your career that you felt you'd seen too much?
Did you lose faith, Reza? Did you think that's enough?
No, it's a very important question, actually. The answer is that after 30 years of being in those places, even now when I saw a child crying or suffering, for me it looks like the first times in all my life I see someone suffering. It has never changed. I have still, even maybe more, because I became older, I have more emotion when I see someone suffering in front of me. I haven't became like, you know, some of the surgeons like became totally, well, it's their job they do. But for us, it cannot be a job. It is not a job. It's a real mission, I believe. It's what I can do and what I bring to the world. So obviously, I have my nightmares of all those people. Obviously, there are times that you think that it's just endless. It looks like the story of the Sisyph in the Greek mythology, that the guy was bringing up the stone and falling down. But I do believe in the humanity, and I really am an optimistic person. So I'm continuing. Every time people ask me what is your best pictures, and my answer is the same. I said, I haven't taken it. I'm still looking for it.
We have another question over here.
Hello. Yes, you ended in a very optimistic way in the presentation with the child with the plant shoots, but now with Obama almost proposing to double the number of troops in Afghanistan, I wonder what you think about the future, the prospects for Afghanistan politically. What do you think will happen?
Well, I really respect Obama, and I think that the 4 November when he was elected is a world revolution. It was it changed the whole capacity and way of the millions of the people in the world to the whole their situation. But he's wrong in Afghanistan. You know, I explained that Nobody has won a war in Afghanistan. That's why I had a joke around 10 years saying that after being in Afghanistan, Obama will change his slogan. It will be